So firstly, let me welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. It's the first CERC research forum for the year, and it would probably be a little remiss of me as a teacher not to give you a bit of an idea of where we're going to head for our next hour. So just to give you a quick overview, there's three things that we're going to do today. The first one is we're just going to celebrate a little bit of a book launch stemming from some recent research that has taken place here at Avondale. And then I'm going to share some of the findings around Christian education that come from that. And then we're going to have a short presentation from our director of our Ellen G. White Research Centre and Seventh-day Adventist research for the South Pacific, and that's going to be done by Mark. So thank you for being here, Mark. So to get underway, let me also welcome anyone who is participating on Zoom today. Thank you for sharing your time with us and coming along to support CERC. And we might make a start. So I'm going to introduce Brenton, ask him to come up, and Tony Williams and John Shapajic and myself, who recently finished a book. I'll show it to you. It's called Making Tomorrow's Church Today. It's the lived experience of youth ministry. So we're just going to have a very, very short little book launch. And then, as I said, I'll share some of the research findings that relate into, Adventist education. Thank you.
So you've come because you don't have to read the book, right? You get to hear a Q&A and you'll know everything about it. Yeah. So the first question I'm going to ask the lead researcher, and that's Peter, is your major finding was?
Okay, well, I guess the big takeaway for me was probably the reality that youth ministry is a separate ministry to other arms of the church. These respondents, the people that we interviewed, were very, very, very strongly of the view that youth ministry was not like any other. And I think their passion for the space was probably something that really struck me as well. A really deep sense of calling, a deep sense of purpose. And they go out into this space, rub shoulders with young people, and they do it because they have a really clear view on what their mission is. And that's sharing Jesus with these people and trying to facilitate and help them along their journey. So that was a big takeaway for me, is the reality from their perspective that youth ministry is distinct and different to other church ministries.
We should set this up and say this is a study of youth ministers worldwide. So, and we'll talk about the collection of data in a moment, but John and Peter went to a world Seventh Adventist Church World Youth Congress in Germany and spoke to people. And their lived experience forms the voice of this book. But the origins, we'll get back to some findings in a moment, Pete. But Tony, we actually should credit your wife for this book, because tell us where the idea for producing the book, doing the research came from.
Okay. I'll be truthful. Yeah. The origins are Bronwyn and I were driving home from church, and Bronwyn was sitting in the front seat. Okay. She's watching me here too. And she was reading the record on the way home, and she just said to me, "Oh, look, there's a youth ministry congress in Kassel." Now, what caught her attention was a couple of years previous to that, Bronwyn and I had some work in Germany that I was doing, and we'd stayed at Kassel, and she raised it because we'd been there. My comment was, "Oh, that's a good opportunity." And anyway, the next day I sat down and I was already preparing to research grant applications for other projects that went on. And I thought, and this is where I'll have to be apologetic, when you come up with research ideas, they mightn't be of the best origins. I pictured a very close friend who spent a lot of time with me in our youth, driving all around Australia. I thought, wouldn't it be good if we could go to Castle, do interviews and then drive around the autobahns for a little while. You know, the partner in crime, Peter Kilgour. So I thought, I'd been to the General Conference several times while I worked here, and what I noted was the type of research that is presented from their centres and around, and it's predominantly quantitative styles of research. And I thought, look, wouldn't it be good with this opportunity with people from all around the world to give them a voice? And we did a lived experience style of study where we actually, and I ended up in hospital, so Peter and John went.
Well, Tony, let me take them up on this here a little bit, because you go to this youth congress expecting to be welcomed. The red carpet is out. The researchers from Avondale are here, given prime time to promote their research. John, you wrote a diary about this. What was the real experience like? The lived experience of research.
We wrote a chapter actually as an introduction to what we have heard from the leaders about our lived experience, and our expectations were quite clear. The way everything was promised to us, okay, through our internet conversations and phone conversation, that everything will be ready. Okay, so Peter and I went out there, and we arrived. There was stinking hot day. And the next day in the morning, I've approached the GC youth leader, and I've asked him question, and he says, well, go and see this and that person. They will tell you everything. So I followed it through, and then we've realized that nothing was ready. Okay, so I got upset, and I'm glad Peter was there, because Peter became very creative, and he said, let's go and get some, let's get some sort of feedback.
I'm glad John mentions this, because in the book, Peter says, or somebody who wrote that chapter says that John became very reflective and Peter became very active.
Hang on a minute. What it meant is that Peter said, let's start sort of looking for people that we can interview, because we've had no one. So for the first 2 days, we thought that it will come back with no information. Okay, as this sort of as it developed, gradually the momentum built up, and by the time we finished, we had 60 people that we were able to interview as groups or individuals, which is quite good.
And that grew with some online survey responses as well. So in the end, there was about 150 people who responded to this, and their voices represented in the book. Let's just go back to major findings for a moment, because Pete, one of the other things you mentioned, this misalignment. Sort of youth ministry is seen as being over there and every other church ministry over here. How do the youth ministers deal with that sense of being undervalued, not supported, and are they seeking to be part of what's over here, or do they like this sense of being different?
They rally together, I guess, is the, they kind of feed off of each other. They recognize that it's a different and separate ministry, but they do see, broadly speaking, that they are in alignment with the rest of the church. The drawback for them from their perspectives, and you can read about it, their voice comes through really strongly, is the idea that they, how do you say it? They just recognize that the people that they're dealing with, the youth, they are dealing with a different mindset. They're looking at things through today's society lens, and they feel often that there's a bit of a disconnect at the local church level and upwards around how then those youth can transition those programs that they go to, the passion that they have, back into a local church area that often is a little bit more traditional, a little bit more, the generational gaps that they encounter.
you speak of this tension. Youth ministry needs to be creative and agile, and yet you mention, or the youth ministers mention, that the other ministries, there's a sameness about it. There's a more invariable form, I think the words you use are.
I think there's another perspective about that. Quite a few expressed to us they thought that they felt that the administrators saw the youth ministry as a time of transition into a better ministry. Okay,
Yes, it was a
real
holding
ministry.
pattern, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It was a
so
holding.
they said to us, well, we feel that, you know, we're in that space that, you know, not enough resources are provided into that sort of interim period, which is perceived by some administrators.
And we'll talk to somebody who never really escaped from that holding pattern in just a few minutes. He's just sitting over there, and I think he's happy that he never really became anything but a youth minister, but we'll get to Gilbert Kanji in a moment. There was a terms of reference that these researchers created, and something wasn't on those terms of reference. Only it was technology. This didn't feature, but every youth minister raised the positive and negative implications of technology, and particularly social media. That's in the end come as not as a surprise.
Well, when you read it, it wasn't. But the way we developed the terms of reference was we conducted an online survey, and there was about 140 respondents. And we analysed all of their responses, and technology didn't come forward. So we didn't have it as one of the terms of reference. But one of the attributes of the lived experience is once somebody triggers it in the discourse with other people, it takes on a life of their own. And so when I was analysing all of the scripts from Peter and John's, it started to really come to the fore, but in multiple levels. So it offered potential, which I think is predominantly untapped, or they see it as untapped because they don't have the skills. But then it is also presenting significant problems. Things are very different when youth are able to look up things at a moment's notice, where when we were in youth, we might have had abstract ideas, but were we going to go to the library and research it for several hours? Mm-hmm. So it just adds a totally different dimension. Mm-hmm. And they saw it as, yeah, it's got wonderful opportunities. We don't know how to grasp it, but it's causing significant problems in their domain.
Now, John, I want to take you to something else in a moment, because you wrote about some cultural differences. So this is a worldwide study, and culture would have to play a part. If you had to sum up the major cultural difference between these youth ministers, what are we looking at? There
were several layers we won't have time to explore, but perhaps coming back to that social media aspect, the intergenerational sort of gap. And what I mean by this, when we arrived there, what we've noticed, that people from all countries, whether it's Africa or whether it's Asia, everyone was running with the iPhone or some sort of instrument sort of communication. And but what came through is that a lot of the leaders suggested to us, we have a generation of young people that we do not understand. They function differently. So this cultural aspect of intergenerational gap is quite strong. And then another sort of aspect from cultural perspective was that in different countries, even though the general idea was to create a movement of program-oriented ministry in youth ministry, they said when it filters down to the ground level, application of that at the local level is quite different. And that's where the tensions are. Because, for example, what we have heard from the guys from Africa, where there's a predominantly strong male-oriented sort of figure at the church level, okay, the youth leaders felt somewhat isolated from the program of the church. And you've already sort of indicated to that there is a gap out there. For example, guys from India, was saying our application of ministry, okay, if it's just simply a program oriented as such, okay, through proclamation, okay, it's different because we're dealing with Hindus, we're dealing with people from Islamic faith tradition. So our approach, our ministry must be completely different. So somehow we need to sort of synthesize the concept, how we're going to function. And then the other sort of aspect when it came to sort of cultural difference from organizational perspective was that everyone was saying, well, listen, we've got a problem because programs are often sort of passed on and decided on at a bigger organizational level. But when it comes to the application of it at the local level, we haven't got enough money. And so we often have to pour our own money to keep the ministry running. So, you know, I think there's several levels of, you know, cultural differences. It's not only one.
Let me finish with this question to Peter. Now, Peter comes to you this afternoon, not as the director of the Christian Education Research Centre or as a senior lecturer. He comes to you as adventurers leader at his local church and as a parent of 3 primary school aged children. So you're already on the journey in youth ministry. Adventurers is one of the pillars of youth ministry. What did it confirm your calling to youth ministry? Did it motivate you to become a better youth minister? What did the study mean for you?
Well, I think at the time I had no real context of what it would mean because, you know, I just finished my PhD when I joined this research team. But my oldest child was starting kindergarten the year that we collected this. So I was only really starting to grapple with, you know, Christian education for my kids, Adventist education. But in the time since, it's just heightened my interest. It's created a sense of awareness. It's just kind of, yeah, it's just kind of always been in the back of my mind. I think I've become more intentional about it off the back of this experience, particularly the calling kind of component that we encountered. But what I would say is, for me personally, it's spiked in interest that I've been able to kind of explore more in other research projects. Looked into school chaplaincy within Adventist schools, and yeah, Millie and I lead out at Lakeside with the Adventurers, and just obviously more intentionality around yeah, the kids in our church, our own kids, and certainly yeah, schools and then schools.
Would you please thank Peter, John, and Tony? And while you're doing that, we'll invite Gil up. Thanks, guys. Gil, come and join me on the couch, on the chairs. We've only got one question for Gil because we're going to get to Mark Pearce in a moment. So Gilbert comes to you not as the director of Catalyst, but as a former director of youth ministries for the Worldwide Adventist Church. And Gil, so you come with some understanding of the challenges and opportunities. But my question to you is, so what? So Peter and the guys have produced a book. Great, they get a research point. It's probably going to stick John Hammond style in the library there with a $20 note in, and no one will open the cover. Why should they? Why should they open the cover? What is the practical application of research like this?
All right, well, I would say that, first of all, this is not a book about the theology, the philosophy, or the methodology of youth ministry. This is lived experience. In other words, the practitioners, professionals, and volunteers have been listened to. So there's a lot of theory out there that we can argue about, that we can have different views on, but you cannot argue against someone's experience. It's like your personal testimony. We can have different views on certain teachings and doctrines, but your story is yours. No one can argue with your story. So I see this book as a great validation of those who have been listened to. And if it doesn't find its place in the library of a conference president, it should find its place in the library of every youth director, and not just a youth director, but a Pathfinder leader, a youth leader in the local church, adventure leader, as a validation, as an affirmation and an appreciation of what they do. I don't know of any, even more so than a youth director, I don't know of a more demanding role in a local church than a pathfinder director. They have full-time jobs. And at least once a month, they're taking their young people in the bush with all the preparation, with all the resourcing, and with all the other human resources and organization that is needed for that on top of their professional assignment. So they are legends, and they have been listened to. And those who've been in the youth circle will understand that the youth ministry team, the volunteers are very loyal, and we have DDs, district directors, who are in their 60s and 70s. These people need to be cloned, but we hope that there is the shaping of a new generation of leaders, because these guys understand what it takes and they are totally sold out to youth ministry. This is validation, and they should have a copy in their hands.
One more question. Most of our conference presidents have at one time in their working life been youth ministers.
Yeah.
Why do they need to be reminded of the power of this ministry to change lives?
Because when you wear a different hat, your approach to ministry can change, right? So leaders are very interested in results, and results mean baptism. And so pastors have an interesting relationship with youth ministry. Pastors don't like anybody being absent from the church on a Sabbath morning, right? They want their people there, but youth ministry take people away, and they don't quite warm up to that. Yet that same youth ministry is probably the most resourceful space for baptism in their local church. They love one piece, and they don't like the other piece, but they go together. So I hope and I trust that, administration, the conference presidents, because, well, Nick is here, he's not a president, but he's a loyal supporter of youth ministry and has been in high leadership, that leadership will understand the nature of youth ministry. You know, you didn't ask me that question, but I would tell you, there was at one stage, and I put my hand up as being guilty of that, when we were living in the 90s and early 2000 in a big cultural transition in the church, right? And if you ask me, how did that show up? Music was up, he showed up, right? So there's a great battle in the local church. And then we felt, and some of you have heard of the underground movement. So we started the underground movement as a movement within the movement, right? And one of the intentions was to create a space where young people could express themselves. Now, we've changed from that, because the danger with that is that when people are taken away from the environment, placed in a different environment, that doesn't mean that when they outlive their youth ministry that they're going to go back to the mother church. Long term, it's not going to work. Now we're talking about growing together. And I think the years that have gone by has created a larger measure of understanding. And I think because of that, we have a better tomorrow for youth ministry.
Would you please thank Gilbert Kanji?
I have a personal hope. I'd love to see something, and that would be all of our ministry students with a copy of this. I don't think anyone's ever referred to me as an idealist, more probably a realist, but I think the challenges that these guys face, for them to know that up front, those sleepless nights, the lack of support, the impact it has on their families, their call, but that is significantly outweighed by the passion they have and by the relational approach that they took working alongside these youth, and, you know, the joy of seeing someone come to Jesus. That's what I would love to see our youth students, our ministry students here at Avondale have a copy of this, because I think they will feel affirmed in their call. The next little bit of today, and can't actually see the time there. Thank you, 12:30. I'm just going to share a few of the research findings that kind of came out of the chapters that we looked at around the perception of youth ministry workers to education. As you guys know, this is a Christian Education Research Centre forum, and so I really want to focus in on that space. Okay, so I'll gloss over this really, really quickly because we are short for time, but I think you've probably got a little bit of a context of the book. It does represent the voice of the youth ministry workers that we talked to. We talked to someone who came from all of the 13 Adventist global divisions, which was great. And we've already talked about the fact that it's a lived methodology approach. We wanted to hear their voice and hear their experience. So just quickly, the book, basically when the themes that kind of emerged from our frames of reference came about, we had 4 broad areas that these themes kind of sat within. Who we are as youth ministry workers, our context, the work that we do, and how they viewed the future. So the one that I specifically want to kind of delve into a little bit with you guys today is the work that they do, because a lot of these youth ministry workers did have links into education. So I'm going to speak into the work that they did in schools. So just quickly, the youth ministry workers who participated in this, yeah, they were entirely global. But it was interesting because while, as we would expect, they had strong links with Adventist schools in a lot of instances, not all instances, there was also a really strong presence in government schools, and I found that fascinating. So I'm just going to share kind of, I guess, a little bit of their perceptions in this space. Unanimously, as probably we would expect, they did feel that we needed to have a presence in government schools. Quotes like this one from a respondent from North American division: I think we need to get closer to government schools. This person wasn't seeing too much thinking in that space. I think we need to get closer to government schools. We're not working enough for the government schools, and I found that fascinating. I should kind of point out that because of those cultural nuances that we've alluded to, the reality was that for some people, that was easier than others. I'll share a quick example. One of our respondents who came from the Ukraine, they emphasized the fact that, hey, it's actually a lot easier to get access into public schools in Ukraine than what it is into Christian schools. It's hard to set up Christian schools in countries like Ukraine and Russia, which are both located in the Euro-Asia division. So the fact that they had already developed and they were trialing kind of something at that particular time, where they'd had some materials that had been kind of brought in, translated into the local languages, and they were having some success by actually getting out into public schools, secular schools, was quite unique. In Ukraine, if you're talking about public schools, secular schools, we as a church can approach and can have some success in public schools where we talk about social problems. Now, they couldn't go out there and, touch too much into a lot of religious subject areas, but they were certainly able to link with the students around social problems that they were encountering and bring a flavour from a Christian perspective to that. You'll notice there, that second set of quotes down the bottom there is from a respondent in Russia. And they had, the youth ministry workers that we talked to there described the reality that youth ministry, Adventist youth ministry workers in Russia had had access to public schools for an extended period of time. It wasn't a new thing there. In fact, they were actually employing people who specifically had the role of, as Adventist youth ministry workers, going out to these schools. And you can see some of the comments that they said. Directors of the schools really liked it. They valued it. The parents and teachers, they were supporting it, but they emphasised that it is a lot easier again to access government schools in those country contexts than what it is to access Christian schools. Another comment that kind of came through here from someone in North America emphasised the fact that when they first started in youth ministry, they had access to schools and they went there, and that was valued by the school. They saw God using them, interacting with the students. They were coming into contact with people from other religious backgrounds, their families, etc. And they felt like that was being blessed. And they took the view, which was echoed by many other respondents, that again, having a youth pastor in these settings, both Adventist schools, Christian schools, but also government schools, was a blessing. One of the themes that consistently kind of came up was this touching into other faith backgrounds, students from other faith backgrounds that these youth ministers experienced as part of this. And they were commenting on this type of thing. While members are not all Adventist members, they're actually other religion members. And so they were commenting on the reality that for a lot of families who weren't Adventists, and Gladly, you'll know this, your PhD was in school choice, it was the values type element that brought those other faith denominations to Adventist schools. But once they got there, that was an interesting process, because a lot of those students, because they were surrounded by the influences of those working alongside of them, they were attracted to Adventism. They started sending other children to their schools, and a lot of them actually were baptized along the way. So there's an emphasis, I guess, on the ability of Adventist schools that these guys were seeing in multiple different country contexts to actually reach students from other faith backgrounds. One of the things that I actually found really quite interesting, and which I acknowledge I'd never really thought about before, was that these youth ministry workers largely saw a particular age demographic as being the most approachable in terms of helping grow their spiritual formation. And what they're actually finding is that it was Pathfinder age kids. You can see the quote there from someone in the inter-European division. But what they're actually finding is the ages of Pathfinders, which if you know much about Pathfinders is set between the ages of 10 to 15. They're actually finding that that was the age group that actually showed the most interest in their spiritual formation at that time. And these youth ministry workers in a lot of different contexts were saying, hey, it's not these guys that are 18 to 25 who we rub shoulders with in youth programs and things like this. It's the younger kids that show more of a receptiveness to us sharing Jesus and growing that faith formation. So yeah, just an interesting little theme that emerged. I thought I would share there. Another couple of challenges closer to home. One of them was stating that in a country like Australia, where you've got schools that are fairly defined in what they do with their time. Obviously, you've got that, the curriculum kind of components. They want to have an opportunity for chaplaincy and youth pastors to be there alongside the students. They found it really, really difficult to get traction going on programs just because of the layers that often they encountered in the local school setting to actually getting the support for and the impetus and drive to implement new programs, quotes like this one, which is in the Australian context. With chaplaincy, I think, personally, being at a big school, dealing with a lot of leaders from primary school to high school, just trying to get things happening has been quite difficult. So it's hard to create change in a very set and structured environment. It takes a long time to get people to a point where they make a decision to give us an opportunity to do something different, and that's been a real challenge that they've faced. Also, in the Australian context, they talked about this link that we often see where schools have a church on their campus, and some of the bridging that they described, I think is the term they used, that needs to happen at that space. I found in the last kind of quote, I don't want to steal from it, but they were describing, these youth ministry workers in the context of schools and church were often describing kind of this disconnect that exists there. And yet they all, because of their just passion for this space, and it makes sense to me, saw the opportunity that exists for youth ministry to kind of bring together these three different kind of groupings where there's often disconnect: the families, the school setting, and the church. And so they saw opportunities for that. And, you can see it there, trying to connect them, trying to connect the church with the school and the school with the church. That's an area that has been challenging for them. And they, that was something that emerged from the findings here. Another one really quickly was this gap between worship styles. And if you've been into the school setting and you've attended a week of worship or these type of things, you'll know that how these young people experience worship is very, very different in many cases to what they experience at the local church level, and we alluded to it earlier. That's a challenge, because these young people, the youth ministry workers were describing the challenge that they go away and they run a program and they do it how the youth want. And they come away from that weekend and they're on fire for Christ. They're on fire for God. But then they wind up back in their local church setting and the worship style just doesn't include them. It doesn't resonate. There's these generational gaps. And so they were identifying these challenges in the youth ministry space. Yeah, the need to accommodate youth at the local church level. A few of them kind of alluded to, this generational gap being at an all-time high. And, this is a long quote, certainly not going to read it, but it emphasizes the reality that at the local church level, a lot of these youth ministry workers were experiencing this disconnect that the youth face because they're so set in their ways. And so the young people kind of just, they're on the fringes, they're on the edges there, that they might not be celebrated there, included, given opportunities to lead out, and these type of challenges. And that placed a lot of difficulty for these youth workers to kind of keep some of these students, some of these young people who are on the fringes in their local church setting still attending. And they were facing that. That was an everyday challenge for them. This is an interesting one. Maybe a societal role change a little bit. I don't know, do with it what you will, but the youth ministers were kind of lamenting the fact that for a lot of parents, they send their kids off to the Adventist school and kind of anticipate that those values, that those, that their spiritual nurture for their children is actually going to happen at the school level, and that they can kind of step away from that. Quotes like this one, we're like, we see your kid all day. We spend almost every minute with your child. How much time are you spending with your child at home? Is Netflix babysitting and raising your child, or are you? And you don't say that to the parent, but that's where the behaviors often come from. The pressure is on the pastor, the chaplain, the youth ministry worker, and the teachers not only parent, but raise the child. And so, we were encountering kind of viewpoints like this that just show a bit of a shift in this space that made it a little bit more challenging in that space. They acknowledged that there was a range of pressures that were impacting them in the student-facing youth ministry that they worked within. They all acknowledged, hey, we're under pressure, we've got to get baptisms. One or two of them, I'm assuming the stuff like that you mentioned in this quote is Bible studies and these type of things. There seemed to be this constant struggle that there was a need to justify youth ministry. And they struggled within this because at times it wasn't supported, or they weren't given funding, or there wasn't, there was that view that we kind of made mention of earlier, that you're just there to bide your time until we can get you a local pastoral role. Okay, so some of these were the challenges that they were seeing. Constantly facing questions of how much value is there in youth ministry. In North America, at least, this is a North American division respondent, youth ministry is still relatively seen as a holding position for intern pastors. You're just there to put in your time, then you move on to real pastoral ministries. The pressures are that you're not really doing true ministry in a sense. This is what these guys are grappling with. But they're calling never wavered. It was quite amazing. I found myself so impressed by talking to these people because they constantly made mention of the challenges they face and the lack of support and the difficulty, of building relationship that allows them the influence with these young people to kind of grow their faith journey and experience Christ. But, they never doubted their value to youth ministry. They never doubt for 1 minute that youth ministry itself is a pivotal role for the future of our church. You can see quotes like this. There's definitely a role for youth ministry to play to help keep connected to them, the youth, to the church as they go through the secular world society. And hopefully as they come out the other side, by the time they're 25, youth ministry will have built enough bridges to the church so that they'll come back. That was their overarching hope. And as I said earlier, and I'll finish here, when we talked a little bit about the future of youth ministry, it was amazing, the optimism. They just spent 50 minutes of a 55-minute interview, recounting the daily, challenges and issues that they face, and the difficulties of finding enough time for their home life, and the high need for, being relational to make youth ministry really effective. That was the one biggest attribute they felt youth ministry just needed to have. It's just, you had to relate, you had to be there. alongside these kids. You had to go to their basketball games. You had to build time. They were often reflecting on the fact that it wasn't a program that they run. It was the fact that they came to Tommy's mum's funeral. You know, it was the highly relational nature of youth ministry and the, you know, the challenges that that plays. But then when you ask them what it was that they saw in the future of youth ministry, they saw it booming. They saw it growing. They saw these young people kind of coming back and leading out at the local church level and kind of being the church of tomorrow, like the book title suggests. Youth ministry definitely has a role to play. I think part of the failure of youth ministry in the Adventist Church has been our inability, whether it's through lack of interest or lack of methods, our inability to bring all three together, the home, the church, and the school. Youth ministry, they seem to unanimously see this. Youth ministry is the one thing that can really unite all of those three areas. We really need all those three areas healthy and supporting each other when one falters. Really, for the life and health of the local church, especially if there's a school connected to it, youth ministry can really bring all those things together and lead through influence, not necessarily from the top, as a lot of organizations are structured. Definitely there's a role for it to play there. So just a major takeaway of these guys, I'll never forget how optimistic they were about the future. They faced challenges, but their call just outrode it all as far as what they, you know, how they felt about working alongside the youth, which is fantastic. So I guess for me, yeah, it was an amazing experience, as I am now kind of, you know, grappling with a new paradigm shift, I guess, in thinking. You know, this is a space that I think we've really got to support and really be intentional about trying to, yeah, encourage, facilitate, and grow the role of chaplaincy, the role of youth ministry, particularly in our educational context. So that's my 2 cents. So at this point, I'm going to ask Mark to come up. So I've asked Mark to be part of today, because I guess as I grapple with what is it in youth ministry that kind of lends itself to these guys being so effective alongside these young people, there's two things that I continue to come back to. Our schools are mission fields. Mission and service, these are the two things. And my understanding of the purpose of our schools is very much caught up in with mission. So I've asked Mark to talk a little bit about, from the Ellen G. White Research Centre's perspective, what is the view there around the purpose of education, and what, you know, is our call to mission. So I'm going to ask Mark to share that now.
I've actually found the launch and what some of the stuff you've in it very interesting, given my own experience. But what I'm going to do, while Pete gets that going, is look at what Ellen White says about education very briefly, very briefly, because the very existence of this place is due to Ellen White. It was her drive and ultimately her enthusiasm that saw this property purchased 125 plus years ago. For some, it was not a positive prospect, but Ellen saw what this place could be, and that's evidenced by her purchasing part of it, on which she built her home over there at Sunnyside. But the question is, why was she interested in education? What did she see as the purpose of education, and what was her philosophy of education? The fact that Adventists came to see the need for education is actually quite remarkable, given that their spiritual forebears, the Millerites, sustained their strongest criticisms from the learned divines with their doctoral degrees. So for that reason, the earliest schools were often in the parlours of church members. Part of the motivation for that was to keep the children off the streets. A greater motivator, though, was the desire to see them come to understand Jesus Christ as their personal saviour. James and Ellen White believed and taught that it was the parents' responsibility to educate their children, and that included hiring teachers to do it, because their schools like we have today did not exist back then. So they practiced what they preached in that regard. There was, however, no plan for education, and as Van der Veer asserts, for the first 20 years, the denomination's finest asset, its youth, had gone relatively undeveloped and unharnessed. Yet education, along with health and publishing, became one of the elements that characterise Adventist endeavours wherever they may be found. Ellen White developed her educational philosophy within the context of her overarching great controversy theme. That is to say, it is set within what she portrayed as the cosmic conflict between good and evil, Christ and Satan, God and the devil. In her book, Education is set in that context, with the light existing before the oldest record of human teachers. Now, what I want to do here is read the paragraph that's right at the beginning of the book that I think is particularly relevant. True education, she says, means more than the pursuit of a certain course of study. It means more than a preparation for the life that now is. It has to do with the whole being and with the whole period of existence possible to man. It is the harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers. It prepares the student for the joy of service in this world and for the higher joy of wider service in the world to come. So she says first up that true education means more than the pursuit of a certain course of study. It does mean that, but it is more than a degree or a certificate. She says it's more than a preparation for the life that now is. Again, it means that, but it is more than that. She says it has to do with the whole being and with the whole period of existence possible to man. Thus, education is for this life and the life to come. It is also holistic, impacting the whole person, not just the cerebrum. It's upskilling the whole person in areas other than the purely academic. She explains what she means, quote, it is the harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers, end quote. And that's why we have activities that are social and physical, as well as those that are spiritual and deal with personal wellness. Her aim was not to deal with one area alone, but to develop them all, because each of them impacts the spiritual dimension, and for her, that was the dominant one, the one that mattered the most. For her, all education is set against the background of the spiritual dimension because it was the ultimate reality. But what is a well-rounded, wholesomely developed person to do? Was this growth just for themselves? Well, her statement goes on. It prepares the student for the joy of service in this world and for the higher joy of wider service in the world to come. There are two elements here. First, education was to prepare the student to work and serve others here in this world. They were not being educated to help themselves only, in order rather to serve and bless others in the work that they were being trained to do. So they were not just getting skills for the sake of learning skills and improving themselves, but rather to help others. So true education is never about oneself only. It is about becoming skilled in order to bless others. Secondly, if there is joy and satisfaction found in serving and blessing others in this world, because of the work one has been trained to do, and I think we would agree there is, there's an even higher joy, she says, and wider service in the world that is to come after the cosmic conflict ends. That is, education is not for this life alone, because human beings have the promise of an eternal life where there will be even greater joy and satisfaction than we gain here now, as well as broader opportunities to serve than exist here. So White holds out something that is beyond the seen, the reality that we know, and asserts that education is preparing for that reality as well. So service is the motivation for education. That means education has a missional element, and this is the point that Peter was making. It has a missional element within it that drives it and gives it meaning and purpose. Education helps to do something that Snorrison describes as White's ultimate aim for education, namely, quote, the restoration of the image of God in the human being, end quote. This means a restoration of the unity that existed between God and his creation, his family. This, for Ellen White, is the ultimate aim of Christian education and the reason for which Christian educational institutions exist. I would suggest to you it is also the reason why Avondale University exists. Today, as many of you know, the Adventist Church operates the largest Protestant educational system in the world. According to the 2023 annual statistical report of the Office of Archives and Statistics at the GC, the church was operating 107 tertiary institutions, 2,793 secondary schools, and 6,897 primary schools as at the end of 2022. In fact, there was an increase of 247 educational institutions over the previous year. That immediately suggests something of the spread and impact that Adventist education can and is having in our world, and we are part of that. But it also indicates that Adventist education must be intentionally missional in its outlook and purposeful in its intent to teach values and morals in a society that increasingly ignores, reinterprets, or ridicules Judeo-Christian beliefs. The teaching of values and beliefs is an integral part of why we exist. It's also something that parents are looking for in the education of their children. So in conclusion, Christian education endeavours to train and skill its students for this life and the life to come. This was Ellen White's vision for it, and it is done in the context of our need of our Creator and Saviour. Thus, it is intentionally missional in its emphasis, in seeking to inculcate those beliefs and values. Thank you.
Mark. Maria, I think you want to make a comment.
Thanks, Peter. Just need to have a look at this. Peter, we're very sad to see that you're leaving Avondale, but we're happy to know that you're not moving too far away. Today, on behalf of your colleagues and friends and Peter Kay, our research dean, also Harry Browning, where's Kirsty? There she is. Kirsty Pearce, and all the other leaders here at Avondale as well. We'd like to say a big thank you for all the work that you've done for CERC, for HDR, and for research here at Avondale. We've really appreciated how you've embedded Christian values into everything that you do, what you've taught us along the way, including your encouragement to learn Auslan, and the way you've supported us, your friends, your colleagues, do you remember how to say students, and for your leadership as well. Today, we're not going to say a final goodbye, but we're going to say see you later. We wish you all the best for your work, for your family, and for your future. We are going to really miss you. From our hearts, we're grateful for the time that you've spent here at Avondale, and I think it's added up to probably more than 10 years.
Yeah,
More.
it's 12 here, but it's half my lifetime.
Wow. So
Student, staff member, yeah.
fantastic journey. So a big heartfelt thank you from all of us here from our heart. Thank you. All the best. Thanks for everything that you've done. Great to work with you. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you for being here, making time for this, supporting research at Avondale, and yeah, supporting the work of CERC as well. To everyone online, everyone who yeah, is just linked in, we just thank you. It's been great. I've loved my time here, loved working alongside of so many of you, love the time with my students, and yeah, I'll be around. I'll be around for sure. Thank you.